Hi.
Hi, Laura. Welcome to our inaugural episode of Rewarding Relationships.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great to have you on. And you're very easy to chat to, so I'm sure even though it's the first episode, it will be a nice flowing chat that we'll have today.
I will do my best. I think the amount of conversations that we have offline, we're just going to bring that energy into the 100%, conversation.
Yes, definitely. So the theme of the series and that we're going to put together today in Rewarding Relationships is all about how businesses use rewarding relationships to improve their relationships with employees and customers.
Yeah.
So it's all about how we create better and more rewarding relationships with employees and customers. Today, we're going to focus more on the employees and talk about how employee engagement's intrinsically linked to business performance. But before we jump in, I think we should learn a bit about you. So tell us a bit about yourself and your business.
Thank you. So it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. I love our conversations. I love the work that we've done together, and long may that continue. So brilliant to be here. So I'm Laura Wheatley. I do a couple of things. So I run a small but mighty business growth consultancy called Infusion Group. We do, and do you know what's really interesting? We really focus on the two different parts of a business. So for us, it's all about the people on the one side and performance on the other. And I think that we need to make sure that we don't treat them as two very separate things. But in our mind, you can have the best business plan and strategy in the world, but if your people aren't rocking and rolling and clear on what they're supposed to be doing and motivated to deliver, what's the point? But likewise, you can have the best people who are chomping at the bit to grow your business and to work really hard and have a great time. But if your, plan and structure isn't there, then we've got a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with that. So maybe you've answered it a little bit there, but what does rewarding relationships mean to you particularly?
I think for me, if I think about rewarding relationships, about being fulfilling and mutual and respectful. So for me, it's sort of that basis of trust that is essential for everything. And I don't think we can underplay the importance of having that trust to begin with. And in the work that I do, which is primarily around, coaching, consulting and team dynamics, I think we need to make sure that there's that two-way partnership as well. I think that's really important. So that lovely balance between, support and challenge and encouragement and showing that and helping people grow, but also being that, the critical friend at the same time.
Absolutely.
What about you?
Well, I get rewarding relationships is our strapline for Incentivesmart, and it's all about sort of this. It's based on a Harvard Business Review article that I read a long, long time ago called The Service Profit Chain. And it sort of relates the fact that if you want great business performance, it starts with leaders, communicating mission, purpose, values, making sure that that is communicated throughout the business. And trust, as you said there, is really important. And that creates, I guess, an environment where people can be more engaged in the business because they're more motivated, they understand what they're working towards. And that in turn sort of creates a service quality for your customers or your distributors, whoever your end customer might be. And that drives loyalty. So those customers understand that you're engaged in the business. They want to work with you. You're easy to work with. You're obviously enjoying your job. So I want to buy more from you. And that in turn drives business performance. So there's a lot of evidence to show that these things are intrinsically linked. And that's where rewarding relationships comes from. So we live and breathe that every day at Incentivesmart. Yeah.
And it strikes me that there's something really lovely there about it being a real win-win for everybody involved. And that's the whole rewarding piece, right? Is that it's great, and it can be rewarding in many different ways, which I'm sure we'll be diving into.
Yeah, you don't have to be, there's I think if you watch programs like The Apprentice, there's this sort of misconception that you have to be mean and tough on everybody to get what you want out of business. But I think my approach to business, certainly, and I think I see it with all the people we work with, is that win-win is the way forward, right? Yeah. Everyone's got to be happy. And if everyone's happy, they're all driving towards the same thing. And I think there's a multiplier there, effectively.
I agree. And I think there's that lovely shared purpose of what you're working to. It's the infamous why, isn't it? When you're all rocking and rolling in the right direction, in the same direction, it kind of can spiral and grow together instead of it just
Definitely.
being a solo thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that.
So I think the sort of more modern way of looking at business is to be more people-centric with your leadership.
Yes.
I think that's more of a focus of businesses these days. So what are your thoughts on that in today's business world?
I think it's critical. And I think if we come back to the tenets of what makes a great business, there's going to be a person or people there as part of the business in some description. And I'm sure we will come to speak a bit about AI and technology and how we're shifting and moving. But, people are at the heart of a business, and they're the lifeblood of your business. And you touched on it earlier, but I think it's worth repeating. The business performance is only as good as the individuals within it. So when we've got people who are focused on, revenue, profit, driving margins, which I completely understand, business is a commercial enterprise, but they often miss that link. They're so focused on looking at the result, they don't kind of trace back to think, how are my people doing? How is every single person in my team? Because if we can get that performance up to, kind of 8, 9 out of 10, then the business results will follow.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think there's such a high cost of recruitment these days, skilling people up. There's a small pool of really talented people to choose from as well.
Yeah.
So finding good talent's hard. So you've absolutely got to treat them well to retain them, right?
100%. I think finding them in the first place is the challenge. But making sure that they are incentivized to stay with you and to perform to the best of their ability is the real secret sauce.
Absolutely, yeah. So what do you think's so if that's the state of things today, and the old-fashioned way was probably to be, more stick, I guess, than carrot.
Yeah.
What do you think is the future of HR? Maybe I'm too early with this question in this chat, but let's go straight there.
Let's go
Jump
straight
into
there.
The future.
I think that it's so difficult to have a crystal ball, isn't it? If you'd asked me 2-3 years ago what I might have thought in terms of leadership trends now, I'd probably feel more comfortable. But with AI playing such a huge part in all of our realities, I think it's really difficult to predict exactly what the next few years will look like. What's really speaking to me and what I'm noticing is a real shift away from the more traditional command and control form of leadership. Like you said, managing and leading with the stick, driving and forcing and pushing. I'm seeing, and I'm overjoyed when I see more of a empathetic, inclusive approach to leadership. I'll avoid talking around what we're seeing around the world right now, but I think we're all familiar with what those different styles of leadership look like. And I think there is absolutely room for getting back to the individual, getting back, upping the ante on our people and making sure that they're invested in and feel that they're in a safe, inclusive environment to do their best.
Absolutely. You mentioned AI there as well. So we'll come back to that later. We won't dwell on that just yet. But it's an interesting topic when you're talking about sort of human to human interaction and getting back to that personal level and personal interaction. So we're starting to see roles now, talking about the future of HR and what's starting to happen now, seeing roles like head of happiness and chief heart officer sort of cropping up around businesses. What's your view on those? Do you think they're just buzzwords? Is it rebadging HR? Is it kind of, how do you feel?
It's a great question. I think if we're not careful, it can sound as if it is part of this sort of overarching tick box exercise. I am a huge champion of these roles, but I think with any role within a business, we've got to be so clear on what the purpose is. We've got to be clear on what the purpose is, clear on what they're there to do, and we've got to make sure there's transparency so everyone else understands that. What's really interesting is that this isn't really new news. I remember seeing it's Claude Silver, who is the Chief Heart Officer at VaynerX. So Gary Vee asked Claude to take that role. I think it was something like 10 years or so ago, clearly really ahead of the trend. And what I really love about that approach is that when I look at Claude's bio and I can understand what she's driving and I see her content, there is absolute clarity that she is there to protect, nurture, and look after the people within the business. You know, there's a lot of feeling going on. There's a lot of heart going on. There's a lot of soul going on. And it's very purpose-led. And I think the word purpose is flung about so much, right? But it's real clarity for me when I look at that around what that role really means. But of course, you know, like with any role within a business, having the clarity is one thing, having the outcomes we want to achieve is another. But people are complicated, people are messy, people are challenging. And I think it's really important that we're measuring the success of those roles, but we've got to make sure that the KPIs and the things that we're measuring are, sometimes they're going to be intangible. That's what I'm trying to say. You know, sometimes it's about how someone is feeling. And yes, we can put measurements in place, and I'm sure we'll come to talk a bit about data, but we've got to make sure that that's at the heart of those people's roles. Absolutely.
And do you think that those roles fit within HR? Are they two separate roles, sort of human resources, very process driven versus very feeling driven, that you might find with some of these job titles? If you know, and as you mentioned, Claude Silver there, that role feels very different to HR, but it still fits within that, I guess, people header.
Yeah. I think I feel for HR at the moment. I think there is a real shake-up going on in terms of what does HR really mean? And I know many people who are in HR and have a real focus on exactly what you would expect: the policies, the compliance, the processes. There is a real importance when we come to HR that our contracts are as they should be. You know, we've got to play by the rules in many aspects. However, how can we make sure that the human resources is still visible and valid? So I see there being a shift where there is more of a focus from HR on this culture piece. But do you know what? It makes me ponder a little bit about almost like marking your own homework a little bit, because it's difficult to be in a position where you're the one setting the rules and the boundaries and the, you know, here's what we're doing. And then you're also championing and trying to support those people. It's challenging. And I get frustrated when I see, you know, my HR peers and those that I know in my network who are having so many new things shoved on their desk, and then suddenly they're being rebranded as a head of people. And they're like, I don't know what this means. What does this mean? And they might not feel qualified, able to do that. So I think there's a need there, but again, it's back to that clarity piece.
Yeah, it feels sort of traditional HR feels more academic, and this is certainly not that, is it? So
exactly that.
Yeah. Obviously, employee happiness and how people feel at work is really important. And this is why we're seeing some of these roles, but also how we develop people as well. So it's not just about being happy, it's about having the right amount of challenge in the business. And some people actually thrive on that rather than being happy. I'd rather be challenged and pushed all the time than go in and be, you know, happy and cakes all the time. I certainly need to stay away from the cakes myself at the moment. There's this amazing, I don't know whether you've ever done the Gallup survey that a lot of companies do, but there's a great question in there around having a best friend at work. And Gallup say that you're 7 times more likely to be engaged in your work if you've got a best friend at work. What are your feelings on that?
It's an incredible stat, isn't it? And the data doesn't lie. It's telling us something. It's informing us about the importance of having that connection at work. And this is where I get frustrated when the culture and the relationship side of things at work is badged as this fluffy, unimportant thing. It's like a nice to have. Yeah. I think it's essential, whether it's a best friend or whether it's somebody there, again, that you can trust and talk to and have each other's backs. You know, we need the water cooler moments. We need that bonding. And back to what I've said at the start, having that trust is really important. So if we have someone that we can trust at work that feels like a friend, we're more likely to show up as ourselves, give our best self, you know, and then as a consequence of that, perform better. So It's a brilliant piece of data.
And you're going to be in the trenches with that person, right? So if they're your best friend, you want to perform for them, you want to work hard for them, not let them down. One of our values at Incentivesmart is around teamwork, which is win and lose together. So it's, it's not always positive things, but it's when things are going well, you celebrate together, and you can do that as great friends and colleagues. But when things are going bad as well, as they inevitably do every now and again, people are there for you, and you've got a friend there to sort of support you through it. So I think it's really interesting. There's such a big correlation as well. We've both been reading a book, we found out.
We have. We've both been reading the same book, which is fantastic. So, Better Culture, Faster by Andrew Safran.
Yeah, really interesting book. I have to confess, I haven't got all the way through it. But the bits I've read so far are really interesting. And he's got this kind of 5-step methodology, hasn't he, about driving a culture through the business. And what are your thoughts on it so far?
I loved it. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And the reason why it appealed so much and hit the mark with me is because of its simplicity. I think sometimes we can overcomplicate and we get lost in the weeds of what a great culture is. It's all about the sound bites and the tick boxes and not about actual meaningful transformational change within a business. So I think the model is really effective. We apply a lot of it in how we operate with clients, but it strikes me that it's one of those kind of simple but not easy. None of this is a really quick, simple fix.
Common sense is rarely common.
Exactly that. But the approach itself, I think is fantastic.
Great. So, we won't get into the detail of the book because, as I said, I haven't read it thoroughly. But, I've taken some key things since we mentioned that we're both reading it. So the first point that he talks around in this framework, I guess, is clearly setting expectations, behavioural expectations for employees. What's your take on that? How would you do that in a business?
Oh, it's a great question. It all starts with clarity. It all starts on clarity about what we are trying to achieve together. And we can't expect people to guess and to know how they're supposed to behave and show up if we don't tell them. It's absolutely impossible. It's like playing this guessing game where one person's like, am I doing it right? They're constantly second guessing whether they're behaving in a way that's in line with what the culture is trying to be. So I think it's the absolute fundamental starting point in having that clarity and transparency right at the start.
Absolutely. Yeah, we obviously, as well as employee programs, we run customer loyalty programs, and we've had certain situations in the past where people have said, here's what you're going to get, but they're not telling the people what they have to do. What's the behavior you have to do to get this? So there's a target, but the end user doesn't know what the target is.
Well, it's like a really bad crystal maze game, isn't it? Where it's just like, well, how can I work it out? So if we really think about that, unless we're providing true clarity, and I don't mean all this mystical, stuff covered in blurring in jargon. It's like, no, this is what it means. This is what it means to behave in this sort of way. We've got to be giving real life examples and not confusing it and just expecting people to know.
So do you think company values tie into that when done correctly? Obviously, we don't talk about values like they're just words on the wall.
Yes.
Within our business, they are really ingrained in everything that we do. Yeah. So how do you think a values part of that sort of defining those expectations?
I think values are absolutely essential in defining those expectations. I have seen it a lot where business owners are expecting performance to be up here, and they'll have their SMART goals, they'll have their very formal business objectives of what individuals need to strive for, but they're completely missing the behavioral piece. So for me, it needs to be the same. We need to define the expectations in exactly the same way as we would if we asked someone to achieve a business goal. And I think company values are a brilliant place to start. whatever you call them, if business values, company values, if there's a company charter, whatever that is, there has to be those expectations set. Otherwise, it is just a guessing game.
Absolutely. I think people need to really understand how they impact the business as well, right? The work we've done together, which is really exciting. I really enjoyed the last workshop that we did, which was around the GC index, Game Changer Index. How does that sort of feed into this setting behavioural expectations, or is it the other way around? Do we do the Game Changer Index first and understand how people? Well, you tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, of course. No, I'm happy to, and likewise, thoroughly enjoyed the time we spent going through the GC Index experience. So, the GC Index is a tool that measures a person's energy for impact. We're not looking at personality here. We're not looking at measuring capabilities or skills, anything like that. It is their energy for impact to take on a certain role within a business. And the different styles, the GC Index calls them proclivities, are based around a business life cycle. So they are super practical. So we can actually understand how inclined somebody is, what their energy and their appetite is to take on certain roles as part of that business life cycle. And the bit for me that's really interesting and how that links to culture is because if you look at somebody's individual energy for impact, I mean, that's incredibly insightful to know when we start looking at their roles and how we can develop them and have really meaningful one-to-one conversations. There's so much we can do on an individual level. But then if you extrapolate that out like we did and start looking at a team, so say a leadership team, if we're understanding as a group what their combined energy for impact is, that is so powerful. It's almost describing and giving us data, again, back to that word data, about what that leadership team is compelled to do, how they show up, the tasks and the activities that they're drawn to. So it's kind of like a way of understanding what the culture of that team is like. So whilst we wouldn't use the GC Index to measure behaviours, it is a fantastic tool to align business priorities to people's individual energy for impact.
Yeah, and I thought it was so useful compared to doing a personality test, which often you do, and maybe it goes in the drawer and you go, oh, that was interesting. And that was true, but it kind of, we've used this already in lots of areas in our business. And personally, it made an immediate impact for me because it made me realize where my proclivities lay. And I kind of knew it, it deep down anyway, but it kind of really highlighted it that, I'm not an organized person, let's be honest. Luckily, I have some very organized people around me, but I'm not that organized person. So, keeping on top of emails, getting the admin done, not my thing. Having big ideas, that's my thing. That's what lights me up and keeps me interested. So after we did the GC Index work, it highlighted that I needed somebody to be doing that stuff for me. So I hired an assistant. So it really made an impact.
And that's amazing because that is you using that data to then make a business decision, right? And yes, we've had some great fun along the way and sharing insights and getting to know each other better, which is usually what these sorts of tools provide. But you've made a tangible change within your business to make your life easier. And isn't that what we all want, is to show up and do the work that lights us up and to be operating in our zone of genius, because the business will fly that way. If you've got more space to come up with new ideas and drive that vision forward and forget about the stuff that doesn't bring you so much energy. The great thing is that there will always be somebody where those things do light them up, which is brilliant. We just got to piece together the puzzle.
Absolutely. I love that you call it the zone of genius as well. I'm a genius now.
We all have a zone of genius.
We all have a zone of
but
genius.
You know what? It is about finding it, because like you said, with the personality profiles, I think they're fantastic. I use some of that in my work with teams in particular. But like you said, it becomes a bit of a fun, we had a great day together, and then it just gets forgotten about. And that's where I think the GC Index does have an impact, because you can use it to continually be making better informed decisions based on a data set. Yeah,
it's highlighted strengths and weaknesses in our leadership team. And I think all the guys in the leadership team have gone away and found that useful within their teams as well.
Oh, fantastic.
So it's been really, really good. So sort of swerving back to the book, because we could talk all day about the GC Index. I love it.
We could.
the next sort of phase, I guess, of the process in Andrew Safran's book was, how do you engage people in that cultural change? How do you get them bought into the culture? So do you have any views on that?
I do.
Do you do anything within your own business?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the really important bit to remember is that it's a co-creation process. And I have seen it done terribly, where those at the top in their ivory tower will define and shout from the rooftops about how things should be. Now, yes, the leaders have to lead and take charge and be pioneers, and they need to walk the talk as well. But my view would always be to be getting buy-in and getting input from the teams. Company values and that sort of, what the culture of a business is driven and created by the people within it. So quite how we think we can just, use ChatGPT to come up with a few buzzwords, and then it's like, oh, brilliant, there are values, everyone needs to follow that. It's just not going to work. So my first kind of tip, I guess, on that score would be absolutely get your people bought into your process.
Yes. Yeah.
How did you do yours?
I mean, we use our own platform, obviously, shameless plug. But, I think driving the sort of the values through the business is really important for us. So we came up with the values as a team. Brilliant. So, we've added a lot of new people to the team, and they haven't yet been challenged. But the original core of the team came up with our values. And we use them in everything, to be honest. We use them in interviewing. We use them in performance reviews. We use them even exit interviews when people leave the business. We've got our Third Tuesday Club, which is our exciting sort of all hands meet in our town hall for Incentivesmart, which gets rowdy. There's even a little incentive in there to get a noise complaint as well.
Oh, so, really? Yeah. That's one of the shared goals.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But we just love that sort of, it gets everyone pepped up, but it's all focused around the values. So we celebrate people that have been recognized for the values throughout the business. Yeah.
And that's just a perfect example of where they are being truly lived and breathed. They aren't just, the fluffy words on a wall that everyone's supposed to remember and they don't. We've got to make sure that there are references and touch points as part of everyday working life.
Yes.
And the more we do that, the more there's those little kind of breadcrumbs that we can follow, the more it's going to start being integrated and part of just the way things are.
And it's never perfect, is it? It's always a work in progress. I mean, we do this for a living. This is what we do as a business to try and, involve companies. Well, I suppose discover their values and integrate them throughout the business to drive performance.
I think you've hit on a really good point as well. Is this, are your values something that you discover, or are they something you create? Because the other word of warning there is it can be brilliant to come up with these lofty, ambitious goals. Everyone wants to be innovative and ahead of the game and, the next Google and Apple. But we've got to make sure that what we're really truly setting as our values is a reflection of us as a business. Yes, we want a bit of aspiration there, but there's no point asking everybody in the business to align to values that make absolutely no sense.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we talked about this previously, didn't we? About the idea that if you work at Apple, you don't move fast and break things like you do at Facebook, right?
Exactly.
So there's no point having that value at Apple, because you you strive for perfection before you release something, rather than release and iterate. Yeah, and I think that's just one example of how you could put a value into a business and it really not work. But we see this a lot. Yeah.
Oh, completely. And if we remember, really, it's supposed to be a representation of our DNA. So if it's not a true representation, it's going to confuse the hell out of our people. Yes. And it's also going to be really difficult when we start using that language in communication with clients, and they should get an idea of what it's like to work with you through that. So it's absolutely brilliant that you are I wouldn't just say using them, you're living them, you're embodying them. And everyone in the business is doing that as well, which is fantastic.
Absolutely.
That's the gold standard. That's what we want to get to.
What, do you have values within your business? Is this kind of because you're a smaller consultancy-based business?
Yeah. We do still have values. Great. We make sure that we are not only talking about them, but we're referencing them in conversation. So partnership is a really big value for us. We make sure that we are, because we're a small team, small but perfectly formed. We have such a huge partner network because who we work with, it's like there's an ecosystem around us of amazing stakeholders that we work with. And also I think, as we've proved, our clients end up becoming partners. That's how we want to operate. So yeah, we absolutely do. And I don't think you need to have a huge business to still have values that drive how you operate. I think it's really important to have an understanding of what that culture is.
Totally agree, because I think your values should work external to your business as well, right?
Exactly.
So even if you're one person, what are your customers' values? How do you interact with people? Yeah. And we talk about our values as if, you should treat these values like they apply to everybody. The lovely lady who comes and waters our plants in the office, the person who delivers the post, when you're out, everybody, it's not just customers and people within the business who are employed, everybody you interact with. So I think that's really, really good.
I think that's brilliant. And Rich, I'd also say that there's an element here. They have to be non-negotiable. It's like, this is how we do things, right? And we've got to set the bar in terms of our expectations in order to then be able to understand if people are aligning. So, and that's not to be cruel and mean and to start, shoving people out, but we've got to set the standard and set that bar somewhere.
Yeah. And you can't always meet them, right? So one of our values is wow everyone, and you can't always wow everyone all the time. My favorite one is challenge everything. I was going to just move on to that in a second. So, challenge the status quo. Don't always just accept the job that's put in front of you or what somebody else says and just accept that. You've got to challenge that. And that's how we all learn and move on. But, often we're guilty of not challenging people. We're all a bit polite sometimes, aren't we? So you don't want to challenge somebody's view on something. But I think if you kind of employ Radical Candor is a great book. I don't know, have you read that, Laura?
Yes. Yeah, so big fan.
Really interesting book about how to approach challenge with people. And I think if you can do that well, and I definitely am learning as I grow as a leader, I think that's worth its weight in gold, because that's how everyone grows, and how you grow and how your team grow as well. So I was going to ask you, sort of leading on to that, I guess, is how do you sort of, one of the steps in the book talks around measuring progress and providing constructive feedback. That's obviously key to making sure this is, maybe I've led the question there a little bit, but what's your view on that?
It's fascinating, isn't it? How we all love to give praise. We all love to give positive feedback. We love to incentivize and then reward people. I think it's such a lovely thing when you can celebrate someone's success. But often I see people struggle with the constructive or developmental feedback that is just so critical. And to your point about radical candor, I'm a big believer that clarity is kindness. It's a Brené Brown quote that stays with me, and I keep that with me often because I'm still practicing myself at having that radical candor, that real honesty that then continues to build trust, and it's critical to everything. But what you've made me think of is that we need to make sure that the environment that we're creating allows that. So your value of challenge yourself and challenge everything, that's absolutely brilliant. I love that so much. So how can we make sure that people are really understanding that they can share, they can challenge, they're not going to be looked at or judged for doing that and questioning. Yes. So I think that's a really good point. And it comes through a lot in the book as well around making sure that the environment is set up in a way that your values can live and breathe. Otherwise, you're just setting people up to fail. So I think it's a really good point.
Yes, that psychological safety, I think, is the correct term for it these days, isn't it? But yeah, I think that's really important. We see people come into our business from more corporate environments where they're terrified to speak out because they've had a culture of blame in their previous business. And I think, having that safe space to challenge things and to say things honestly is huge in a business. Absolutely. That's why it's one of our core values. Why it's my personal favorite value of ours. The last sort of point that Andrew talks on in the book is about reward and reprimand. So how do you sort of view those two things? Should they be held together or should they be separate? Are they separate ideas, really?
I think that they are a really important part of measuring and managing and driving performance. But for me, I would be treating them as two separate things. I feel that we need to be very clear when we are giving feedback, when we are reviewing and assessing someone's performance. And when I say performance, I also mean alignment to values and that piece as well, not just what they do, but how they do it. We've got to be clear. Are we rewarding? Are we reprimanding? And so often I see the conversations really muddied. You've heard of the proverbial shit sandwich, where it's like, okay, I'm going to tell you something great, then I'm going to tell you something that's really difficult. But then I'll end on a real positive because actually I feel really uncomfortable and I don't want to leave you feeling rubbish. And it's so true because it's really difficult, but there's an art to doing that. It's a skill that you can learn. But I think we talked before, you've got a great example of where those two things have been confused.
The sort of carrot and the stick,
Yes.
So we've got a client who will remain nameless, and we really push back against this, but they will allocate reward to users for good behaviour, and then when something goes wrong, they take the reward away. And we really push back against this because we think these two things should be kept entirely separate. And in that particular example, it does. You've got this sort of, you talk about the psychology of reward and recognition, and there's a concept called loss aversion. And the idea of loss aversion is that when you lose something, you feel the pain of that twice as bad as if you gained it in the first place. So if you conflate these two ideas of rewarding and reprimanding, I feel like you're almost losing the point of the reward in the first place.
It becomes really confusing, actually, hearing you talk about that as an example. It's like anyone who's got kids knows, you want to be encouraging them and motivating them to move towards great behavior and rewarding them for responding to that. And we don't want to then make them feel awful if something that they do isn't appropriate or needs reprimanding. We can't then tie it to their biscuit that we gave them yesterday because they did well. It's like, I think the psychology behind that can get really messy unless we're clear on those two things.
I agree. Yeah. I think physically thinking about it, you can't take the sticker back off the reward chart.
Yes.
You shouldn't take the sticker back off the reward chart. We have a naughty step for reprimand and we have a reward chart for reward, and the two things stay separate. You don't take the reward back away. Otherwise people don't trust the reward in the first place as well. That's another reason, right?
Yeah, of course they don't. And also it makes me think about, in psychology and in the coaching world, we talk a lot about, are you moving towards something or are you moving away from it? And if you are typically feeling, scared, fearful, you're not in a great place with where you're at. You're so desperate to move away. There's a place of scarcity, right? Yes. You're looking to move away because you don't like where you are, instead of what we really want, which is that aspirational view of moving towards where you want to be. And I think you can apply that to the reward as well. It's like, am I scared of getting reprimanded, or actually am I moving towards with motivation towards being rewarded? Yes. And it's kind of, it's one and the same thing, but it's the frame and the context that we're talking about that's really important to help guide people.
Absolutely. We've got a program, one of my personal favorite programs that we run is really purely about behavior change within a fleet of drivers. So it's a corporate fleet. They've got about 150 drivers. And previously, they've got this driver score, and it's based on how hard you brake and how quickly you accelerate and cornering speed and all these kind of things. But also, and it churns out a driver score essentially based on the telematics of the vehicle. And traditionally, what happens in these, the telematics is used as a stick. So if you fall below this score, you're going to get pulled in the office and you're going to get told off for your driving. But no one ever offered reward for great driving in this business before. So what you were finding was all these drivers would just do enough to not get reprimanded, just do enough to keep your job. And I think, we see this with businesses all the time when they say, well, why ever got to put a reward and recognition program in place? They get paid, don't they? Don't they just...
Yes. They should think themselves lucky for just getting the paycheck, right? But I think it goes back to the core essence of human behavior and how we operate as animals, essentially.
Yes.
We all want to be, I say all, typically most of us want to be doing a good job. We don't turn up at work thinking, I want to do a really terrible job today. Rarely, that there are some people, but rarely. And we also want to know that we're working towards something. Progress is really important to us as humans. So, and how can we make sure that there's lovely checkpoints along the way to be celebrating that progress? So that's the kind of magic that I think if you can tap into that in your individual people, then jobs are good.
Absolutely. And coming back to that program that I was talking about with the drivers, we instigated the reward for people doing excellent driving. So now their insurance costs come down, but also the drivers are actually competitive about it. Who's got the best driver scores? Before it was just like, they never discussed this thing because it was just the stick.
Yes.
And now there's a carrot and now there's some reward and people are competitive about how high they can get on their driver's score.
Fantastic.
And it's just created a completely different culture in that business, which is amazing. So that's why I'm very proud of it
brilliant.
as a program. Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about how employee engagement affects performance of a business. And I think there's loads and loads of research out there that directly correlates employee engagement, great cultures with great performing businesses. How do we convince leadership teams and boards, the people who pay, who sign the check at the end of the day, how do we get them to invest in it? Because sometimes it is seen as a bit of a tick box exercise, right?
It's such a great question. I think we've got to talk about the statistics which show that profitability within a business is 23% higher when our employees are engaged. There's facts. That's a phenomenal statistic. Yes. So, and I think sometimes it's important to talk in pounds, shillings and pence because I appreciate that businesses are a commercial enterprise, but yet we have to understand that how our employees are feeling, how they're showing up each day, how clear they are on their goals, how much we incentivize them. All of that has a huge part to play in their performance. And if we can get our people to this lovely 8 or 9 out of 10 in terms of their performance, the rewards will be huge for the business overall. And it's terrible that we feel we should have to talk just about money, right? But the data doesn't lie. And also it's who wants to be showing up to work where there is a really terrible culture. We talk a lot about the Sunday scaries and how do you feel about going into work on a Monday? I've been there before. I've had that. I know what that experience is like. But there's ways and means that we can change that for the better that then informs the success of a business. Yes,
that's great. Yeah, that idea of the Sunday night dread or the thank goodness it's Friday, hump day, all those kind of things. That's coming from people who are not engaged in their roles, right, and not fully happy about being in work.
Absolutely.
Obviously, we all have life outside work, but I think it's really important because we spend most of our time
it's critical
at work and with our colleagues, maybe more than our family often.
100%.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that you've just kind of touched on is that a business has a culture whether you like it or not.
Yes.
So whether you feel like you are building a great culture or whether you feel that you're investing in your culture, it is the essence of what it's like to be in your company. It's what you stand for. So you will have one regardless of whether you're investing in it or not. And that's what I really love about Andrew's points within the book, is almost like helping businesses really discover what's not going great, because culture is about what's not going great as much as it is about this aspirational, lovely place that we want to get to. And I think we've got to see it as this ever-evolving feast, right? Because it doesn't stay still, just as our people won't stay still. There's going to be movement, there's going to be changes. But if we can eliminate or at least reduce the stuff that isn't going well, because your people will know that they will be having conversations about the familiar things that are getting in their way, slowing them down, the stuff that they don't like. Just imagine if we can start moving through those pieces, what we can really do. And it doesn't have to be huge either. We talk a lot about transformation, but it can be incremental small things that just makes people's life easier.
Yes, absolutely. So do you think that companies really understand that when they start to put in engagement and motivation programs? Do you think they really get to the nub of what does motivate people?
I think what I see is that the intention is sometimes there, but I don't think the sitting down on a one-to-one level to really understand the motivators and drivers of that individual, I don't think that happens as often as it could do. Because, we've talked a lot about having a company-wide view of values, which is really important, but knowing and really understanding your people on an individual level, I think, is really important. And also what incentivizes them as individuals, right? Because
Absolutely.
Gone are the days where we all have the same, okay, give me a pay rise. It's not that simple anymore. People do want different things.
And what do you want the pay rise for as well? So I think it's one of these, it's a natural thing when somebody says to you, what motivates you? And people will go, oh, cash, especially salespeople, right? But what does the cash buy you?
Yes.
And what does the thing that you bought make you feel? And I think that's ultimately what the motivation is. Does it give you status? Does it give you comfort? Does it give you security? That's what's important, not the cash at the start. And I think companies sometimes make a mistake when they're putting these programs together to send out, what would you like as a reward for great performance or great behavior? And the first tick box will be cash.
Yes.
And I think people don't even go past that one. It's a really easy response, right? Tick.
Well, of course. And if you are, if you ask a really closed question, you're going to get a closed answer.
Yes.
Would you like to be paid more? Yes.
Yes.
Who's going to say no to that, right? But I think as I watch globally these kind of shifts and changes, we could have a whole episode talking about the pandemic and the impacts and what we're still seeing now. But people want more than just to be paid well. They want more. They want flexibility. They want the opportunity to progress within a business. The entire world of work is shifting, and we've got to really understand that and recognize that and stop preaching about the old stuff that just isn't relevant anymore. So like you said, it's about choice.
It is, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So do you think there's sort of elements of behavioral science? We obviously use behavioral science in our programs. How do you think that works in creating sort of more rewarding employee experiences and more engaged workforce?
Oh, I think it's essential. And back to that point about having an understanding of what every individual wants. Look, I get this is a really tough ask because we're talking about individualization and personalization, but we're also talking about consistency and fairness. We've got to set the bar somewhere. We can't bend to every single wish, but we can conduct surveys, we can find out what people are looking for, we can have a good old-fashioned conversation to find out. And I think all of that can be then built together to build really great, decent data sets that then provides people with the right choice.
Yes.
Is that what you have seen work really well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you need a choice. You hit on there is really important. Everybody's different, and you can't just pick a demographic group and say everybody in that demographic group will like this thing. You know, we see a lot of programs, employee ones particularly, where you're trying to drive behaviors. It might be around ideas, or, you know, it's the old suggestion box.
Yes.
And people will say, oh, you get to, you know, put a suggestion in, you'll get some vouchers and get to 10 years loyal service with us, and we'll give you a Rolex, or, you know, and there's all these different things going on within a business, and they're very targeted around specific rewards that may or may not engage individuals, and they certainly won't engage everybody. No way. So we kind of, I mean, shameless plug for what we do, but points-based programs we find are really useful, because you can offer points for all of these different behaviors, and then the individual member, the individual employee, can go and choose something that's meaningful and interesting for them. So why, you know, maybe I don't want an iPad. Thanks for offering an iPad. Maybe I've already got one. Maybe I don't like Apple. Maybe, you know, whatever it might be, offering that as a reward, even if it's for a promotion for customers or a reward for an employee, just isn't going to motivate everybody to get to the next level.
Rich, I think that is so important, that it's back to that personalization, isn't it? And realizing that a broad brush approach, it just isn't going to work. It just isn't going to work. It's not going to motivate people in the right way. And I love the idea of somebody having choice. You know, they've earned their points. They've worked really hard. They have demonstrated all of those behaviors, and they are being rewarded in a way that really rewards them. And I think it's so important, because choice is critical. You know, we touched on before we came here about gifting experiences and rewarding folks based on, it doesn't always have to be a material thing, you know, it can be an experience. And I think that can drive better behavior when somebody, I mean, and it does the reputation of a business like so much good, because everyone then talks about the experience they've had.
Trophy value, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's back to the whole point where we are all different as individuals. You know, somebody might want their iPad as a gift. Somebody else might want an experience, or somebody else might want to go out and choose themselves, or something entirely different. So I think knowing that is really critical.
Absolutely, yeah. We always we've got this old story back from days of Yellow Pages. Do you remember the physical Yellow Pages book, where the salesperson in particular was getting lots of quarterly bonuses, cash, but never really talked about those things. But she won a driving day to go at Jonathan Palmer driving day, and she met the CEO, and they kind of presented her with a certificate, and, you know, proper shaking hands and kissing babies type day. But if you went back and asked her now, and certainly when we were dealing back then with that individual, that's the thing that they talk about, not the bonuses, because you can't talk about that at a dinner table, right, with your friends round. I've had this amazing bonus, you know. But you can talk about this incredible experience you had. And I know that doesn't necessarily speak to choice, that particular thing, but I think it was that trophy value and sort of moving away from cash, the recognition element of that won over the cash 100%. I suppose on that topic, sort of the some companies treat employee engagement like a tick box exercise, don't they? You know, what's your view on that?
It makes me really sad. It truly does make me sad, because I think that those who do are missing such a great opportunity. I think that your employees are smarter than you think, and they know when there is an initiative that's rolled out, where there is something that feels clunky and when they're being asked lots of questions and then nothing changes, they're not daft, right? They will know, they will feel it, and that will impact the trust they have for you if they feel that this is just a tick box exercise. You know, we've seen so many great DEI programs completely backtrack now, which is a shame. But I think it does give us the opportunity to question, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? And how does it link to who we want to be as a business and where we want to get to as a business? And I think the danger of the tick box approach is that it will be sticky plaster type stuff instead of meaningful change that benefits everybody.
Here's some benefits. Be engaged.
Yes, exactly. And it's just not that simple. So I think people can tell, and I think that will then drive their response to how they're performing in line with the tick boxes that they're supposed to do. Yeah. People aren't stupid.
Absolutely, yeah. I asked the question because I think it's some of the pushback we've had in the past where you're looking at the platform and people are like, well, it's the technology doesn't replace people. And I 100% agree with that. I think it's an assistance tool for people. So you should never put in a benefits program and just go, well, they will be engaged. Be engaged. And I don't need to talk to people now.
I've done my bit. We've got a platform
they've got
now.
10% off their dry cleaning. They're going to be all right.
They're going to be happy. Well, it's like and we saw a lot of this post-COVID, didn't we, where offices were in panic. It was like, okay, we need to get the pool tables. We need to get the bean bags. We need to suddenly do loads of socials to get people and draw people back in. And again, people are wise to that. They know what's going on. So I think it's important to treat our employees like they are adults and not, we can't just do the kid gloves. It's not, they're too smart for that.
Absolutely. I think those things are cool, by the way. I love it.
Yeah, me too. We all want pool tables and coffee.
And I think they're useful, but they have to be in line with everything else in the business, right? You can't have this horrendous stick culture and the pool table in the corner that everyone's scared to play on and socialize.
Exactly. And the other thing there I think that's really important is going back, all of the incentives and the benefits, they've got to be linked to something. And so if you rush straight away to be putting in any sort of benefits, any sort of performance management framework, we've got to still be clear from the off on like the business strategy, right? It's like, how does it all trickle down? Where's that lovely link between performance behaviors and what we're trying to achieve? Because that becomes really meaningful instead of just hey, here's a voucher. It's we can make this more meaningful and powerful, which will then drive better performance from people because they'll be inspired to carry on and go the extra mile.
Definitely, yeah. So before because I know we're going to be tight for time, we talked at the top around AI and HR and how that is affecting the HR space and the people and culture space at the moment. What's your view on the growth of AI and where do you think it's going?
Oh, wow. I mean, what a big question. It's really difficult to predict, is what I would say. I couldn't tell you what the next year is going to look like because as you well know, the pace of change is so fast and so quick and so revolutionary, it's really tricky to know what the future is going to bring. So what I would say is that we've got to remind ourselves that this is supposed to be a tool to enhance how things are. It's not supposed to be a replacement. And, the old adage of, knowing how to use AI is going to put you a step ahead, which I think is really important. But so is being great in your role and performing exceptionally. So I think we've got to be really careful not to put fear in people, either for their roles, for their futures. It can feel like a really unsteady, uncertain time for a lot of people right now. What I do know in my heart of hearts is that no bot is going to be able to replace the power of a human to human conversation.
Let's hope not.
Let's hope not. Let's hope not. It's just not, you're going to, that the nuance and the complexity and the layers behind that one-to-one connection, no bot is ever going to replace.
Sure, yeah. I think there's research showing now that some of these artificial intelligence for support, for example, are getting better scores than human beings because they're more consistent and quicker and so on. Yeah. But I think you're right, when you're getting down to deeper human emotion, and the stat that I love is 77% of human behavior is driven by emotion. I don't think I think you're right there. It should be like that. What was the phrase that I heard last week was assisted intelligence.
Yes. To
sort of take away some of the artificial element of that, because, it's more about being genuine and using AI to assist your processes, not to replace your processes.
I love that. And I think that is such an important point, because we have a couple of choices in how we view this. We can come from a place of fear and scarcity, or we can be curious and say, right, what does this mean for me? How can I use this? How can I, we're at this precise moment, we're still the ones in control.
Yes.
Don't know what's going to happen. We'll meet again in a year and see. But yeah, this kind of the human to human piece, I don't think is ever going to go away.
Yeah. Or, this time next year, this will be avatars of us having this conversation.
Yeah, we won't even need to show. We can just be sitting over there having a coffee. Yeah,
absolutely. Amazing. So how do you think tools like GC Index that we've done with you and our products at Incentivesmart, how do you think they sort of help businesses? Just a wrap-up question, I guess. How do they help them create higher performing teams?
Oh, it's a great question. I think for me, I would always come back to the data and the insights that we have and how that can then inform business decisions that we make. So using something like the GC Index as a tool, it really can help uncover things that we don't know about a person. And that for me is really helpful to then be able to see beneath the surface. And I think, like we said before, around the importance of having proper reward systems and platforms in place, making sure that it is tailored to what the individual, the team, the business, the client, what is it that they really need? It has to be purposeful. Absolutely. I think it's really important. Maybe it's a theme of our conversation. It has to be purposeful. It has to be really intentional, not just a nice to have.
Brilliant. Excellent. So I wanted to wrap up with some kind of jazzy prop or something. Stephen Bartlett does his ask a question for the next guest. Maybe we need to get our spin the wheel in here next time for a final question.
We should.
But yeah, thank you for coming on. It's really brilliant conversation. Maybe next time, if you join us again, we can spin the wheel.
We'll spin the wheel next time. It's been a pleasure. Thanks,
Laura.
So much.
Cheers.